Retaliatory tariffs on more than $20 billion worth of US imports. That's effective immediately. The announcement was made by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. Canadians are reasonable. And we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake.
President Trump has now responded to that announcement, threatening to raise tariffs again on Canadian goods. He doubled down on social media, calling the Prime Minister Governor Trudeau. Mexico is the US's second largest trading partner. The country is set to announce retaliatory measures against Trump's tariffs on Sunday. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's bring in Athony Chan, former Chief Economist at JP Chase. Always good to have you on the show. First, how sweeping are these tariffs, and what should consumers expect in terms of how it's going to reflect in their back pockets?
I think that they're pretty broad and sweeping across the economy, given the fact that these three countries account for such a large portion of all the imports coming into the United States. With respect to what consumers can expect, they can expect higher prices. But keep in mind that whenever you have a tariff, it's a one-time only. If you impose a 25% tariff, inflation picks up for those goods, but it doesn't just keep happening. It happens once to the extent that those tariffs remain unchanged. But that's not the end of the story, Sally. What happens is that the other countries then retaliate, and that in turn hurts the economic growth prospects of the country initiating the tariff. So in the case of China now imposing all these tariffs on all these agricultural goods, it's going to hurt, obviously, the farmers. In fact, if you go back, Sally, to the last time under Trump 1.0, we ended up allocating more than 90% of all the tariff revenues going back to the farmers to basically try to make them whole from the damage caused by the tariffs. So there are really no winners here.
China seems to have a more specific strategy targeting these more rural areas, Trump supporters. It says it will fight to the bitter end of any trade war, but is China's strategy at the moment to try and create some space to at least start a dialogue with the Trump administration?
And of course, everybody wants to solve this problem, Mexico, Canada, and of course, China. But you do know, in all fairness, that the rural areas, as you point out, Sally, and the farm sector, they were largely Trump supporters. And so to the extent that they're going to be bearing a huge part of that burden is the strategy, and it is the strategy to try to exact some discomfort to the United States for these tariffs. Keep in mind that there is a huge imbalance in trade between the United States and China. We have a huge trade deficit with China. So to the extent that these tariffs hurt, even with retaliation, the United States gets hurt slightly less than China. But at the end of the day, Sally, everyone is hurt by these tariffs, and the average consumer is going to be hurt because the Federal Reserve of Atlanta, Raphael Bostic, the Fed president, actually said that he did a nation a survey and found that most businesses that he talked to in the survey that he made suggest they're going to pass on virtually all the cost onto the consumer.
So while China's strategy in retaliation seems a little more targeted in these more rural areas, the other tariffs from Canada and Mexico are a little more sweeping. Mexico says it will impose retaliatory tariffs on the US this Sunday. So 80% of Mexico's exports go into the United States, part of more than $800 billion in trade between the countries just this last year alone. What does this mean for both the economies, the US and Mexico?
Well, for both economies, it means slower economic growth. But obviously, because such a large percentage of the exports in Mexico come to the United States, it's going to have a much larger negative impact on the Mexican economy. The manufacturing sector in Mexico practically depends on U.S. exports for their survival. And so this is a devastating blow for the Mexican economy. But we should also take a step back and the assumption is always when you impose these tariffs that they're going to hurt the economies of both countries. But that's only really true if these tariffs persist for long periods of time. To the extent that it leads to negotiation and it gets resolved in 30 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
And
it
what will
has
it take to
more limited impact.
What will it take to get to that point? What is Trump hoping to push these countries to do? Where does he want them to meet him?
Well, he has said that his ultimate end goal is to have a lower trade deficit, but that's not really possible for the United States because we tend to consume more than we produce, and that's why we have a trade deficit. And in fact, under Trump 1.0, when he imposed tariffs on China, what happened was that the trade deficit with China was reduced, but it was increased with a lot of the other neighboring countries in Asia. So you're really not going to make the trade deficit disappear overnight. Even look at steel. We produce 5% of all the steel in the world. In the 1940s, the United States produced 50% of all the steel. There is not a chance that because we impose these tariffs, that in the next 6 months or 12 months, that we'll be self-sufficient with regard to steel production or even aluminum or even lumber, all the lumber that we import from Canada. That's simply not going to happen.
All right, Athony Chan, we'll leave it there. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.